هيا بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى للخير هيا بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى سيروا لنيل المنى.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. We start with the name of Allah. We praise and thank Allah for all of the givings He gave without Allah being obligated to give anything. And we ask Allah to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the ranks of his wives, believing relatives, and companions. And we ask Allah, the Exalted, to protect the nation of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam from what the Prophet feared for his nation. Thereafter, in some previous lessons, we were going over matters pertaining to purification and prayer. We mentioned numerous beneficial issues, and we started to talk about the obligations of lifting the ritual impurity, the minor and the major. And we talked about the obligation of lifting the major ritual impurity, and that is done by performing ghusl, the obligatory ghusl. And we mentioned what are the integrals of the obligatory ghusl, and we mentioned the matters that necessitate the obligatory ghusl, the 5 matters that make it obligatory upon a person to perform the obligatory ghusl before they are able to pray. God willing, we will continue today by mentioning matters about at-tayammum, dry purification. We finished last time talking about the integrals of the ghusl, and then the author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, mentioned that the one who does not find water, or he will be harmed by using water, an unbearable harm, then he makes dry purification. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said that tayammum is performed at the time of prayer per se. At the time of the prayer per se, yani that it sets in. That is, one performs tayammum after the entrance of the prayer time. If one wants to pray an obligatory prayer and he needs to make tayammum instead of wudu, then he waits until the time of that particular obligatory prayer enters before he makes the tayammum for that particular prayer. He said, and after the unexempted najis filth is removed. So here we have certain issues that must be observed, certain matters that one needs to adhere to religiously. So pay close attention. Absence of water, and is either physical absence or by carrying the judgment of absence of water. Yani, why would a person make tayammum? He would make tayammum either because he has no water or because he is sick in a way in which he would be harmed by using water. Then he would be permitted to perform tayammum. As for the case of the one who cannot find water, the judgment of absence of water, there is 2 categories here. One is physically not finding water, that there is literally no water available for him within certain parameters for him, so he would make tayammum due to the absence of water, the literal absence of water. The second matter is called the ma'nawi absence of water, or figurative absence of water, meaning that there may be technically water available, but still the judgment applies to him as if the water is absent. Physical absence of water is by not finding water. One doesn't have water himself, nor is there water with one's companions. For example, if one was traveling, he doesn't have water, nor do his companions have water. Nor is there water within the distance in which it is obligatory to seek it. So there is a certain distance where if a person knows that there is water, then he's obligated to go fetch that water, to go find that water, and he would not be permitted to perform dry purification, tayammum. This is called the close boundary, the distance in which, if he has knowledge of the existence of water, of the presence of water, he is obligated to go get that water, and he would not be considered not finding water. This is called haddul qurb, or the close boundary. If the water was in a place beyond the close boundary, it is not obligatory upon him to seek it. So if a person knew for sure that there was no water within a close boundary, then in this case, he's actually not obligated to go find water. He would be considered that he could not find water, or that the water was absent. And so in this case, he would be permitted to make tayammum, to make dry purification without even seeking the water. Why? Because he knows that there is no water present, there's no water available within the close boundary. The close boundary, some scholars said that it is approximately 0.85 miles. Yani what equals 0.85 miles approximately. And some scholars, they considered that 2.55 miles is the close boundary. That 2.55 miles is the close boundary. So if a person knew that there was no water within this distance, then they would be permitted to make tayammum without seeking water. If a person knew that there was water within that distance, then they would be obligated to go find that water, and dry purification would not be permissible for them. However, the one who has no certainty of the presence of water within that short boundary, rather, to him there may be water or there may not be water, there's a doubt. He doesn't have certainty, but he doesn't know for sure that there is water, but he doesn't know for sure that there is not water. He is obligated to seek water, but it's not within a short boundary that he's obligated to go. Rather, he would be obligated to seek water within what is called haddul ghawth, which is the distance within which, if he called out to his travel companions, they would be able to hear him. This is called haddul ghawth, the ghawth boundary. The ghawth boundary is approximately 450 feet, like the distance of a football field and a half. If the person, after searching this distance, he did not find water, then he would be considered among those who do not find water, those who the water is absent. How does a person search for this? If he was in a flat land, if he was in an area where the land is flat, then he could merely look in every direction. He can look, turn around, and look in every direction. If he did not find water, if he did not see water while in that flat land, looking in every direction, then he could make tayammum. If he was in a land where there were elevations and depressions, highlands and lowlands, hills, valleys, for example, then he would go to a vantage point where he can look around in all of directions and see the lands. And then if he did not see the water, if he did not find water from that vantage point, then he would likewise be considered that he did not find water, that the water is absent, and so he would be permitted to make at tayammum. This is what pertains to the physical absence of water. Either he knows that there's no water within a short distance, or he doesn't know. If he knows there's no water within a short distance, he can make tayammum without seeking. If he knows there is water within a short distance, then he's obligated to go seek that water, and he's not in the judgment of when the water is absent. If he doesn't know, is there water or not within a short distance, then he's obligated to seek it. If he's in a flat land, he can just look around in every direction. If he finds water, then he uses the water and doesn't make tayammum. If he doesn't find water, then he is considered that water is absent, and so he is permitted to make tayammum. If he is in a land that is not flat, rather there are elevations and depressions, hills, valleys, highlands, lowlands, then in this case he would go to a vantage point. He would go to one of those highland vantage points from where he can see around him the land in all of the directions, and then he would look, and if he did find water, he would be obligated to use water. He would not make tayammum. And if he did not find water, then he would make tayammum. Then there is what we call the figurative absence, the ma'nawi absence of water, when there may be water present within the short distance, for example, but he can't get to the water, or it has a judgment that makes it so as if he can't find water, even though there is water. An example is for there to be a predatory beast or an enemy between one and the water. There's some water close by, but there's a lion between them and the water. So then, in this case, even though the water, if it was within a short distance, where had there not been a lion, they would be obligated to go seek that water and use it. But in this case, because of the lion, they would be considered that they could not find water, so they would be permitted to make tayammum, dry purification. Or for one to need the water for himself. If one actually had water, but he needs the water for himself to drink. Or he needs the water for his respectable animal, not like the dog or the pig or the apostate, for example. Rather, some other animal, his horse, his camel, a respectable animal. If he needed the water for himself or for his respectable animal, then he would be then in this case he would also be considered that he cannot find water. That is, the amount of water he has would not suffice for him to drink or for his respectable animal to drink, and also make purification along with that. So then in this case he would be permitted to drink the water and then make tayammum for the prayer. The one who performs dry purification without seeking, in a circumstance that requires searching for water, this dry purification would not be valid. So one needs to be mindful of observing the rules of the religion when it pertains to performing at tayammum. There are some people who may make tayammum even with the presence of water, and for it not to be any type of hardship for them to actually find the water, but they feel lazy. They don't feel like going to the water, so they say, I'm just going to make tayammum where I am. In a case where the person is obligated to seek water, if one makes tayammum, it would not be valid. The Sheikh mentioned that this is because of the saying of Allah the Exalted, فَلَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً فَتَيَمَّمُوا, which means, and you didn't find water, and you did not find water, then perform tayammum, perform dry purification. Another case in which a person would be permitted to perform dry purification is if they would be harmed by water, a severe harm. The harm due to which dry purification would be permitted is for one to fear for himself that if he used water, it would harm his body or one of his limbs, or lengthen his illness. For example, if a person feared that if they use water, they would die, and if they use water, it would kill them, then they are permitted to make tayammum even if water was available. Or if a person, if they would use water, they would lose a limb. They would lose one of their limbs. Then in this case, a person is likewise permitted to make dry purification and not use water. Or even if they wouldn't lose a limb, however, they would lose the use of a limb, then in this case as well, they would be permitted to perform dry purification. And as we mentioned, if a person, they had an illness, and because of using water, this illness would be lengthened, then similarly, they would be permitted to make dry purification instead of using water. As for the mere pain from the coldness of the water, this is not an excuse that makes performing tayammum permissible if that pain did not result in a real harm, So, a person wouldn't just make tayammum because the water is cold and it's uncomfortable for them to do it. Now they know if this coldness, this discomfort won't lead to an actual harm that permits the performance of tayammum, then they would just use the water, they would bear with it, they would be patient, inshallah, doing it for the sake of Allah, and they would gain the great reward for that. Furthermore, tayammum, dry purification, is not permissible for the obligatory prayer until after the entrance of the prayer time. Tayammum in this way is not the same as wudu, for example, because wudu, if you performed wudu before the entrance of the prayer time, and then you didn't invalidate the wudu, and then the prayer time came in, then you could make prayer, you could perform the prayer with the same wudu that you had performed before the prayer time had entered. However, for tayammum, when one wants to perform an obligation, they need to wait for the time of that obligation to come in, that obligatory prayer to come in, before they actually perform the tayammum. Thus, had one made dry purification before dhuhr, before the declination of the sun, which marks the entrance of the dhuhr time, when the sun declines westward from the center of the sky, if they made dry purification before dhuhr, then this dry purification would not be valid for the dhuhr prayer itself. Rather, one makes dry purification after the entrance of the dhuhr time. Likewise, it is obligatory for one to remove the najis filth from one's body before performing the tayammum. Thus, had the dry purification been before that, it would also be invalid. If one was unable to remove the najis filth due to absence of water, then his judgment would be like the judgment of the one who could not find water or pure soil. That is, he has soil, but he has najis on his body, and he doesn't have water, so he can't remove the najis filth with the water and then make tayammum. Then in this case, he would have the judgment of the one, what they call the one who cannot find the two purifying matters. That is, the one who cannot find the pure soil or the purifying soil or the purifying water. As for how tayammum is performed, it is performed by using unmixed soil. Unmixed soil that is purifying and dusty. And inshallah, we will clarify these meanings. So, at tayammum, dry purification is not valid except with soil that contains dust. So if the soil does not contain dust, then it is not valid, it is not sufficient for tayammum. Likewise, it is a condition that it would be from unmixed soil. Tayammum is performed with unmixed soil. Soil that hasn't been mixed with the likes of ash, for example, or plaster, for example. And the soil must be pure and purifying. Thus, it would not be contaminated with najis, like soil that someone urinated on. If someone urinated on soil, then obviously this soil is contaminated with najis filth. So it would not be used for tayammum. It would not be used for purification. And when he said that the soil must be purifying, this means that it is not the soil that was previously used for tayammum. When a person makes tayammum, they strike the soil and then they wipe on their face and hands. They wipe on their face and hands. So whatever of the dust or soil fell from the limb of tayammum, then this particular soil, that part of it, that portion of it would be used. That would be used soil. So it would no longer suffice for tayammum afterwards. It has been used, so one would not use it for tayammum afterwards. So the used soil is that which was used for dry purification by falling from the limb of tayammum. Someone already wiped on themselves, for example. They wiped on their face, they wiped on their hands, and so this is the soil that fell from their face or from their hands. Thus, it would be considered used, so it would not be sufficient for further dry purification, for tayammum again. In the Shafi'i school, in the school of Imam al-Shafi'i, may Allah the Exalted have mercy on him, using a stone is not valid for tayammum. One does not use a stone, even a natural stone, for making tayammum. However, according to some other madhabs, that's the original judgment in the Shafi'i school, that one would not use a stone. However, according to some other schools, it is permissible. According to some other madhabs of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, it is sufficient for one to use a stone to make tayammum. They would have a natural stone, not like a baked stone, like a man-made, man-produced stone. He would have a natural stone, and he would strike that stone similar to how we would strike the soil, and then he would wipe the limbs of tayammum. So according to some other madhabs, the stone is sufficient. The Sheikh mentioned in some of his books that it is permissible for the one who follows the Shafi'i school to follow other than Imam al-Shafi'i in this case. Thus, this Shafi'i, this person who follows the Shafi'i madhab, for example, in the prayer and purification, many judgments, then they would be allowed, it's religiously allowed for them to follow other imams who deem using the stone valid in the case of tayammum. For performing tayammum itself, one strikes the soil with the inside part of the hands, And he makes and maintains the intention of performing tayammum, of what is making the prayer permissible. Istibahu fardus salah, for example, to do what makes the prayer permissible. He has this intention in his heart while he performs the transfer, while he transfers from the soil to the face. Of course, the person is not going to take big clumps of soil and rub it on his face. Rather, with an open hand, he strikes the soil, this dusty soil, and then he would have the intention, striking the soil, he would have the intention to do what makes the prayer permissible, and then he would maintain the intention all the way till when he first wipes the face. One wipes the entire face and then strikes the soil a second time to wipe the hands and forearms up to and including the elbows. So, unlike wudu, the organs for tayammum, for dry purification, are only the face and the hands, up to and including the elbows. So there's no wiping on the head. There's no, wiping the feet, for example, for tayammum. That is not those are not limbs of tayammum. The Sheikh mentioned that also it is an obligation that the wiping of the face would precede the wiping of the hands. And there must be a transfer, that is, one strikes the soil with the intention and transfers to the face. So there must be a transfer with a sufficient intention. And we mentioned that a sufficient intention for tayammum is to intend to do what makes the prayer permissible. Another example of a sufficient intention is to do what makes performing at tawaf permissible. Because as we mentioned, or as it's mentioned in the religion by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that at tawaf is similar to the prayer. That is, the conditions that are necessary for the prayer are the same conditions that are necessary for a tawaf. However, that in tawaf, talking is permitted. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam likened at tawaf to the prayer, but the tawaf has certain matters that differ from it, and that is that one is permitted to have normal talk during tawaf, and it wouldn't invalidate the tawaf, the circumambulation of the Kaaba. However, in the prayer, if a person had normal talk, if they spoke normal talk, while remembering that they were praying and they knew that that was prohibited and it wasn't because they were overcome, then their prayer would be invalidated. And if they forgot that they were praying and few words, few expressions were said, few statements, then this still would not invalidate the prayer. But if it became a lot, then that would invalidate the prayer. So, if a person intended to do what makes tawaf permissible when they were striking the soil, this would also suffice for tayammum that would make prayer permissible as well. Or if a person made the intention to do what makes holding the book of the Quran permissible, because holding the book of the Quran also requires purification, like wudu, for example. So if a person intended to do what makes holding the prayer permissible, this would be a sufficient intention for tayammum that would be enough for one to perform the prayer afterwards. The Sheikh mentioned that the intention must be simultaneous with the transfer from the striking of the soil, then maintaining that intention until wiping the first part of the face. And this transfer, it is for them to transplant or carry. They strike the soil with the inside of the hands, and then they transplant that to the limb of tayammum. The person is obligated to strike it at least 2 times. That's the minimum. As for what invalidates one's tayammum, there are 3 matters. The scholars, they categorized it into 3 categories. Yes, if you broke down each category, it would be more than 3 matters, but this makes it easy for a person to memorize, God willing. May Allah the Exalted have mercy on the scholars of Ahl Sunnah who took the knowledge and organized it for us to make it easy for us to acquire. So the Sheikh, he mentioned that tayammum is invalidated by 3 things. One of them is the invalidators of wudu. So you know that wudu is invalidated by 4 matters, but here all of that can be summed up into the invalidators of wudu. So if a person lost consciousness by sleep or otherwise, except for the sleep of the one who was sitting with his buttocks firmly planted, if a person was on wudu, then their wudu would be invalidated. So likewise, their tayammum would be invalidated. If a person had skin-to-skin contact with a marriageable person of the opposite gender, while and they had both reached a state at which they were normally desired, then both parties would invalidate their wudu. So likewise, a person would invalidate their tayammum. If a person touched the private part of a human with the inside part of the hand without a barrier, then they would break their wudu. So likewise, one's tayammum would be invalidated. And if anything came out of the private parts, except the mani, whether it was liquid, solid, or gas, then one's wudu would be invalidated. So likewise, one's tayammum would be invalidated. So the invalidators of tayammum are three matters. The invalidators of wudu, that's one. Seeing water while not praying. If one sees water, they find water while they weren't in the state of the prayer, then likewise, the tayammum would be invalidated. So now they would go and make wudu. And likewise, what invalidates tayammum is apostasy. And this is another matter in which tayammum differs from wudu, because wudu is not invalidated by apostasy. If a Muslim performed wudu and then they apostatized afterwards without any of the four matters I just mentioned for you among the invalidators of wudu occurring to them, it didn't happen, then they re-embraced Islam and still none of those invalidators occurred, then this person would be considered still in a state of purification. Still, the minor ritual impurity will be lifted. They would not be required to perform wudu again for the prayer. Rather, they would be permitted to pray immediately without reperforming it. Tayammum differs from wudu in this matter. If the Muslim performed tayammum validly, then they committed apostasy afterwards. Then, if they came back to Islam, they would be required to perform tayammum again before they could pray, for example. And with that, we have mentioned many beneficial things pertaining to the judgments of tayammum, when a person would be permitted to perform tayammum and when they would not, what a person does in certain circumstances when the water is not available, and what are the descriptions of the person who would not be required to make wudu and would be permitted to make tayammum due to sickness. And we ask Allah the Exalted to make this knowledge firmly grounded in our hearts, and that we would be able to recall it in a time of need, and that we would teach it to others and implement it when appropriate, and that we would die on a state of perfect belief. Walhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
قلوبنا هابت بذكر الله 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 الله. قلوبنا هابت بذكر الله 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 الله. قلوبنا هابت بذكر الله 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 الله. قلوبنا
أتيناك بالفقر يا ذا الغنى وأنت الذي لم تزل محسنا. Allah وارحم ويسر لنا سبيل الرشاد وجود بالهنا. كربنا فالعنا قد دنا، أنزل كربنا فالعنا قد دنا، أنلنا المنى أغننا واحمنا. وهون أسانا ولا تخزنا، وهون أسانا ولا تخزنا، فقد بات فينا الأسى محزنا. فؤاد اغتنى